Hello and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to learn about Google Maps and how you can integrate it with your Jetpack Compose application. So we all know that Google Maps plays a very crucial part in the modern applications that we use day to day, and especially the applications like food delivery applications and applications for commute. We have seen that it plays a very crucial part of it. So we will see how we can set up Google Maps for the Jetpack Compose application, and I will also go through some of the cool features that it provides. So these are not the only features that it provides. There are a lot of other features. I will provide you the documentation and the resources of those in the description down below. Feel free to check it. So yeah, without further delay, let's get straight into it. So first of all, let's see the demo of the project, and I will go through the walkthrough after that. So this is the end result of the project. As you can see, there are two buttons at the top. The first one is to change the marker. So by default, this is the marker that it provides. So if you want to add our own marker, you can do so. So for demonstrating that, I have added this button. So if I click on this, it will change it to a custom marker. If I click it back, it will change it back to the default marker. Now, as you can see, here is a drop down option. So this is basically for setting the type of map that you want to display. So by default, the map type is normal for Google Maps, but there are, as you can see, 4 other types as well: none, satellite, terrain, and hybrid. So if I choose satellite, it will change the map type to satellite. If I choose terrain, it will change it to terrain. If I choose hybrid, it will change it to hybrid. And for some reason, if you don't want to show the map at all, you can choose none. So let's change it back to normal. Yeah, so apart from these two features, I have added a couple of more cool features. You must have seen the line that is drawn on the Google map when you are trying to go from one destination to other destination, right? So for doing that, we actually need something called Directions API, but that is not the scope of this particular project. We are just using the Maps SDK. So, but we will see how we can draw that line as well as calculate the distance between two different marker points. Okay, so we are going to use something called Polyline for this. So for example, if I click, let's say somewhere here, a marker will appear as well as another drop down option, which is asking us to select the type, the line type. So if you click on that, it will give you an option called Polyline. If you choose that, you can see it will give you the distance in kilometers at the bottom. Okay, now we can we can create a further functionality using something called Polygon. So for this, we use something called Polyline, but there is another functionality called Polygon, which can also be used for calculating the surface area as well as displaying a surface area. Okay, but for doing that, we need more than 2 marker points. So let's say if I add 1, you can see it displays only Polyline option, but if we add another marker point, it will display Polygon option. Now if we choose that, it will draw the area and fill it with green color, as well as it will show the total surface area between these 3 marker points. Okay, we can click on clear and it will clear all those things, and you can perform the other tasks as well. Okay, so that is pretty much it. That is pretty much the scope of this particular application. So let's see how we can achieve this. First of all, we need to set up the application. So let's get into it. We're going to use this particular compose. As you can see, Jetpack Compose already provides us with something called Maps Compose. Okay, I will provide you the link of this particular documentation in the description. So for doing this, we need to go through a couple of steps. Okay, so let me just tell you what needs to be done. So first of all, in the Gradle build, we're going to add a couple of dependencies. So these are the dependencies that needs to be added. We are adding Maps Compose dependency, we are adding the Google Maps Service dependency, as well as something called Google Maps Utils dependency. Okay, so this is required for the Maps Compose that we're going to use. These are required for the Map Service, as the name suggests, and the last one is for the utility functions that is provided by the Google Maps. For example, in our case, for calculating the distance as well as calculating the surface area. Okay, once you have done this, once we have synced the project, we have added the dependencies. But that is not it. We need to provide an API key for this as well. Okay, so for doing that, you have to go through this particular page, which is basically the Google Cloud Console page. If you don't have any applications if you don't see any applications here, you just need to create a project. So once you click on create a project and provide the required information, it will provide you with an API. You just keep that API with you, that is required. And after that, we will go to this option which says APIs and services, and we will go to library, Android manifest, and we need to add a metadata tag. Okay, I have added my API key inside the value, but you need to add yours over here. Okay, once you've added this metadata, we need to add the permissions as well. We need to add the access file location as well as access course location, these both permissions as well. Okay, so once you have added all these things, we have basically set up the project to use the Google Maps Compose as well as Google Maps service. Okay, now let's get into the actual code where we will use those compose as well as the logic for creating this entire project. So this is the structure that I'm following for the project. You can structure it according to your needs, but I've created a models package. Apart from the by default UI package, I have added two more packages. I have added a models package and a util package. Model is having an enum class for defining the line type, that is polyline and polygon. You can change it to a different name, it's totally up to you. And apart from that, we have added 3 different files for 3 different composables inside the UI. And in the util package, we are having a util file for all the utility functions that is required. And finally, we have a main activity. So in the main activity is the initial activity, is the initial file that will be called. So let's start from here. So in this particular activity, we are just checking if we have the required permissions or not. And if we don't have, or if we have, we are calling different composables accordingly. So let's see how we are doing this. So first of all, what we are doing here is we are handling the state of the permissions. So we are calling a function called check for permission. So if we open this, it is basically a function in the util file where it is checking if we have all the required permissions or not. Okay, we required the access file location as well as access course location. So this function is basically returning if we have the permission or not. So if we have the permission, we are calling the map screen composable, and if we are not having permission, we are calling the location permission screen composable. Okay, so for the very first time, if the app is installed, obviously we won't be having the permissions granted. So in that case, this particular composable will be called. Okay, so let's see how it looks like, and I will go through the composable side by side. So let me run the application. I have already uninstalled the application. So let's say if we install it for the very first time, this is the screen that we are getting. Okay, this is basically the location permission screen. This is the composable for it, and this is the callback function inside it. So inside this particular composable, what we are doing here is, what we are trying to achieve is that we are going to click this button, which will open up the permissions dialog asking us to provide all the required permissions. And once that permission is required, we will display the map screen composable. So how we are doing that is that first of all, we are creating a contract which basically takes in all the permissions that we want to grant, or that we want the permission of, and it will, once that permission is granted, it will check if all the permissions are granted or not, and if all the permissions are granted, it will call the on permissions granted callback. So to reiterate, what this will do is, this is basically a contract which takes in the array of permissions required to be allowed, and it will check if all those permissions are granted or not, and once those permissions are granted, it will simply call the callback function. Now this is just basically the initialization of the contract. We are not actually calling the contract. We are not actually launching the contract or the permissions dialog here itself. So what we are doing here is that we are having a column composable, we are having a text, we are having some space, and then we are having finally a button composable. Now this button composable actually launches that contract. It passes the required permissions that we want the user to grant, and once that is passed, once we are calling this launch function by passing the array, it will open up that dialog asking us to provide the permission for it. So for example, if we click on this button, as you can see, it says that Google Maps, which is the name of the application that I have given, is trying to access. It requires these permissions. So if I choose while using this application, now what happens? As soon as I click on this button, it basically means that I'm granting the permission. So as soon as I'm granting the permission, it will run this logic and check if the permissions that I want are granted or not, if all those permissions are granted or not. So if I click on this, it will check for all these permissions, and since I have granted the permission, it will call the callback function, which will trigger this block in the main activity, and we will change the mutable state of this particular variable which was handling the state of the permissions to true. Now since we have updated this to true, which was false by default because we didn't have the permission earlier, now this block will be triggered as this condition is true. So it will open up the map screen composable. So for this composable, we are passing the context. So now this is the you can say this is the framework, or this is the outer composable for our map. Okay, so we are using another composable for the actual map that is called my map, but this is the wrapper around it. Okay, so we are passing the context to this particular composable. Now here we are defining a couple of mutable states. The first one is to show the map, second is to handle the location, third is for the map properties, fourth is for the change icon, fifth is for the line type. Okay, and we will see how we are using all these mutable states down below. So once we have opened this, once all these things are initialized, what we are doing here is we are calling a get current location function. Now why we are calling this is because we want to get the current location, right? We want to get the current location so that our marker will be marked on the current location. So this is again a utility function which takes in a context. So if I open this up, you can see it is taking a context and it is having a callback, a lambda function, which is returning the location, which is called a location fetched. Now over here, what we are doing is we are defining a variable of type lat long, and we are using something called get fuse location provider client, which will basically provide us the last known location of the device. Now to get the current location, there are multiple ways. We can use GPS, we can use network. There are a number of ways to do that, like mainly three, I would say: GPS, network, and using this fuse location provider client. So the simplest way is to use this. Just keep this in mind that let's say if you're using this app on a very new device where we don't have any record of locations recorded by the device itself. For example, it is very brand new app, you haven't opened up Google Maps or you haven't used the map service in any of the applications before, then this won't return anything because it returns the last known location. Okay, just you have to keep that in mind. If you have a use case where you want to get the precise location, or where you want to get the current location from the GPS or network, there are other ways to do that. You can simply Google it. It is very straightforward. You can do that too. At the end, it will just simply return a lat long value of your current location. Okay, so let's see how we can use this get fuse location provider client to get the current location. So I have defined a variable by initializing it with this. Now we are calling the last location on this particular object, and we are adding a success listener to it. Basically, if the last location is successful, if we are successful to receive the last location, it will return a value and it will not return null. So if it is not returning null, what we are doing here is that we are updating the LOC variable, which is of type lat long, with the return latitude and longitude. So it returns a location which is having a latitude and longitude value to it. We're just updating it. We are just creating an object by passing those values and updating the LOC, and we're calling the callback function. You can also add an on failure listener and log it to see if there is any error or not. So this is pretty much it, and this function will return you the current location. So just as I said before, just keep in mind that get fuse location provider client returns the last known location. Okay. So once you have called this function, once we have received this, what will happen? This block will be triggered. Okay, this block will be triggered, and it will update the location variable, which is this. By default, I have provided it as 0.0 and 0.0. You can keep it as null or anything. It's totally up to you. So what happens is, once we have received the value, we are updating the location, and as well as we are updating this flag, which is called show map true. Why so? Because it will take some time, right? It will take some time because it is a listener. It will call that function, it will listen to the result, and then it will call the callback function, which will trigger this block. So we can display a certain text in the meanwhile. So let's say if I rerun the application, you will see there is a small text appearing at the top which says loading map. So this loading map appears when the show map value is false, which is this part. So basically it means that until and unless the show map value is true, we are displaying the text loading map. And as soon as we have received the current location, we have updated the show map flag, it will trigger the my map composable. Now this my map composable is the actual Google map with all these buttons and everything that you are able to see. Now this map takes in a lot of properties inside it. Now you can dissect it, you can bifurcate it, you can make it more modular. It's totally up to you. This is just for the sake of understanding and learning. So we will provide the context, we will provide the latitude and longitude. Instead of doing this, we can just simply, instead of writing lat long, we can just simply write hello location here. Same thing. Okay. We can have to provide the map properties, line type, change icons. Basically all these are properties, are those properties which is going to be used for the features that we're going to add to the actual map. So map properties is basically handling the map type. Line type is basically the polyline and polygon functionality. Change icon is basically the custom marker that we want to change to a different icon. Okay, and apart from that, we have a couple of callback functions. So we need to know when a certain button is getting clicked, and accordingly we have to update the mutable state of the above variables. So for example, if I'm clicking on custom marker, this callback function will be triggered, and we are updating the change icon from which is basically false to true. Okay, I have hard coded the icon for now, but you can also pass the icon. You can also pass the icon, any sort of icons, to this particular composable. So similarly, on change map type is triggered when we want to change the type of the map. We can choose a certain map type, it will return that map type, and we are updating the map properties, which is by default defined as simply map properties with all the default functionality, with all the default parameters. You can call it like this, or you can do a copy function and do this. Both will achieve the same thing. Okay, you can do either of these things. Similarly, on change line type is also a callback which is triggered when we are selecting line type. If we select polyline, this will be triggered and it will pass the line type as polyline, and it will update the state of line type, which is again passed in the property. Therefore it will recompose the my map composable. All these places where we are updating the state and passing it to the property, as soon as either of these states are updated, it will recompose the composable. Okay, So let's see what's inside the My Map composable. So inside the My Map composable, there are a couple of mutable states that I have declared. So the very first one is a list of lat-long objects, which is basically going to store the lat-longs of the markers that we add upon clicking on the map. Then we have a couple of states for the drop down. So the first two is handling the state of the map type, and the next two are handling the state of the line type drop down. Okay, so one is handling the expansion or basically the display of the drop down. The other one is handling the text that is displayed on the button respectively in both the cases. Okay, so as you can see, what I'm doing here is for the map type, by default I'm showing it as normal, capitalizing it. This is basically a extension function that I've added. Similarly, for the line type, what I'm doing is if it is null, I'm displaying the text as line type, and as soon as the user chooses a certain type, it will change it accordingly. Then we are defining the camera position state, which is basically going to take the lat long of the current marker as well as the zoom level. So if you increase or decrease the value of this, it will accordingly zoom in or zoom out. Okay, so the default camera position will be handled by this camera position state. So for example, if I make it as 5f, by default the camera will be zoomed out. Okay, so you will see that it is now zoomed out. Okay, so you can choose it accordingly. You can try to change the values accordingly. Now after that, what I have done here is that I have added a box composable because we want to overlay a couple of composables on top of one another. So the first one is the Google Map. So this is the actual composable that we have added a dependency for, which takes in the camera position state that we have defined here, which takes in properties. It also takes in a lot of other things. If you hover on it, you will see that it takes in a lot of other positions, UI settings, indoor state change listener, lot of things are there. Okay, you can go through it and you can try to add values to those respective properties as well too. Okay, apart from that, it also provides a callback on map click, and it provides a lambda function which returns the lat long of the position where I have clicked. Okay, so as soon as I click in anywhere on the map, this particular lambda will return back the lat long of that particular position where I have clicked. So what I am doing here is that until and unless the line type is null, that is I haven't selected any line type, until and unless that I am updating the lat long list by the lat long that is provided on the click on the map. So as soon as I click here, now the lat long list will have three values. The first is the default lat long, second will be the click that I did over here, third will be the lat long at this particular position. Now to display the marker, what we have to do is we have to iterate through the lat long list. So I'm iterating through the lat long list and I'm calling the marker composable, which uses the mark state which takes in the position that is the lat long to actually display the marker and that particular lat long position. It also takes in a couple of more properties, title and snippet. Basically, if you click on the marker, this is the title, this is the snippet. You can change it accordingly. And the icon. So icon is basically the marker icon. So what I'm doing here is that if the value of change icon is true, then I'm updating it with the custom drawable. If it is false, I'm just passing null. So null will basically display the default marker. But this icon takes in something called bitmap descriptor. Okay, so to create a descriptor from the drawable, I have created an extension function which takes in the resource ID. It converts to a drawable, which converts and then converts to a bitmap, a canvas, and then finally to a bitmap descriptor. Okay, so once that is called, it will return back a bitmap descriptor object and it will pass to the icon. So as soon as I click on custom marker, it is basically changing the value of change icon to true. passing the drawable to this function, which is returning the bitmap descriptor and passing it to icon. If I again click on default marker, it is changing it back to false. Now this particular logic of true and false is handled over here, as we've already discussed. Okay. Now after that, inside the map itself, we are going to display the polylines and polygon. So for doing that, I am just checking if the line type that I have provided in the property, is it polyline? If it is, then we are calling the polyline composable and passing the lat long list and defining the color of the polyline. And if it is polygon, we are passing the lat long list as well as the fill color and stroke color and the stroke width. This also has a lot of properties, as you can see. You can go through it. Similarly for polygon, it also has a lot of properties inside it. Okay. Now this logic will basically handle the display of the polylines and polygon. Okay. After that, we have added a composable column, which is basically handling the buttons. So the first one is simple, the custom marker button. So which basically is calling the on change marker icon, which is basically updating the value of change icon to true or false. So if it is true, we are calling we are passing the default marker text. If it is false, we are passing the custom marker text. I have added some space after that, then added a row. Now this section is handling the drop down for the map type. We have a button which is updating the state of the drop down menu to be displayed, that is basically to be expanded or not. If we click on it, it is expanding it. Okay. And we have provided a text for the button, which is again a state, that is map type menu selected text. This is again updating depending upon the map type that we have selected. So by default it is normal, that is why it is showing it as normal. And then an icon, which is basically the drop down icon. Now for the drop down menu, actually we have added a composable for it, which takes in two parameters. The first one is the state of expansion. For this we are providing the map type menu expanded state, which is updating on the click of the button, and an on dismiss request, which is basically triggered when we are clicking outside the drop down. So if we are clicking outside the drop down, we are changing it to false, which is basically closing the drop down. Now inside this, we have to iterate through the map types, and for each map type we are going to display a drop down menu item. Okay, that is what we are doing here, and we are passing a text inside it to display each of these text in the drop down menu item by passing the map type, which we are getting from the map type values. Now on clicking on the respective menu item, three things are happening. We are calling the callback function as by passing the clicked map type. We are updating the text of the button, and we are closing the drop down. So these things are happening accordingly. So as soon as we click on a menu item, it is passing the type, which is going to trigger this, which is going to update it, therefore recomposing the required part of the composable, and then it is calling or updating the state of the drop down to false, which is closing the drop down. Now after this I've added another space, and here we have added a condition that if the lat long list is more than 1, then only we are going to show the row for the selection of line type. So for what happens here is that by default, or in this case we are having only one value, therefore this is not satisfied and that row is not visible. But as soon as we click on the map, this is now having more than one value. This is true, therefore it is displaying this row. This is again having the same functionality for the drop down. So we're having a button which is updating the state of the drop down. As soon as the state is updated to true, this is called, since we are passing that particular state to this particular property. And if we are clicking outside the drop down, it is updating it to false. But after that, what we are doing here is that we are displaying the polygon only if we have more than 2 markers. So polygon requires 3 markers to be displayed. Since we are want to calculate the surface area requires at least 3 lat long positions. So what I'm doing here is that if this is satisfied, if we are having less than 3 lat long list size, I'm removing the polygon. Okay. And in this scenario, this is the case that this is satisfied, therefore polygon won't be visible, only polyline will be visible. Okay. And after that, I'm iterating through the line types and displaying the respective drop-down menu items. And same thing is happening here, that as soon as I click on the menu item, it is passing that type to the callback on the change line type, updating the text and closing the drop down. So if I click on polyline, it will change it to polyline and it will close the text. But in the other case, if we have more than 2 markers, in that scenario, this won't be satisfied. Therefore, polygon will also be visible. And if I click on polygon, it will display the polygon text. It will update to show the surface area. It will update to show the area covered, and it will close the drop-down menu. Also, I have added another button for clearing all these things. So this is what is happening here. So as soon as we click on the clear button, it is passing the line type to null. It is clearing everything, but adding the default marker. Okay. By default, I mean the current lat long position. So the original should be intact, right? So the original lat long should be intact. That is what is happening here. Now for calculating the distance and the surface area, what I have done here is that I have again added a condition that if the line type is not null, okay, and I have added a when clause here, that when the line type is polyline, we are going to display a text with the content inside displaying total distance. So if I do this, if I choose polyline, this will update the type of line type to polyline. Therefore this is satisfied, and therefore this will be triggered because this is also satisfied because the line type is polyline for now, and it will call this block of code. Now this block is basically displaying the total distance and the formatted value of the total distance calculated. So calculating the distance, I'm called calculate distance, which takes in the lat long list. Here what we are doing is very simple, that we are using something called spherical util, which is provided by the Google Maps util dependency that we have added, which already has a function for computing the distance between 2 points. So in our case, since we are having more than 2 points, I have written a simple logic where we are iterating through the lat long list, and we are calculating the distance between each point and adding it to the variable, and I'm returning it as kilometers. So by default it will return it as meters. I'm just converting it to kilometers over here. So this function basically, to reiterate, takes in the lat long list. It then calculates the distance between 2 points, and since we have more than 2 points, I have to run a for loop and calculate the distance between each points and add the total and update the total accordingly, and then convert it to kilometers and then pass it. So that is what is happening here, and then we are just formatting the value to show up to 2 decimal points. So again, this is a utility function which is basically formatting to display up to 2 decimal points. Similarly, in case of polygon, so in case of polygon, what is happening here is, again, the line type is not null and the type of line type is polygon, right? The value of line type is polygon, so this will be triggered, and we are showing total surface area, and we are again calling the formatted value, which is in turn calling calculate surface area function, which is again similar to the previous function, taking the lat long list inside it. And if we are having so this will never be a case, but just to handle the scenarios, we have added this, that if the lat long list dot size is less than 3, it will return 2.0, because otherwise it won't be able to calculate and it will throw an error. But apart from that, we just need to call the spherical util.compute area. Now this compute area automatically returns the area of the between the lat long values provided, and it provides it in as square meters. So that is why I haven't changed it. So to reiterate, I'm passing the lat long list. I'm checking if it is the size is less than 3. Then I'm returning it to as 0.0, because otherwise this will throw an error if the lat long list size is less than 3. But in our case, since our UI doesn't permit itself, this will never happen. Okay. And then we are calling the spherical util.compute area, which is basically computing the area between the points that we have provided, between the locations that we have provided, which in turns, this will return the double value, and we are again formatting it to show up till 2 decimal points. And we have placed the text view at the bottom. So that's pretty much it for the entire project. I think it's quite a long video, since I wanted to go through each of these things in depth, but I hope you liked the video. So if you have any questions regarding this, if you have any other queries, or if you want me to create videos on some topics, please write in the comment section below. And if you have watched till the end, do like the video and subscribe the channel. Thank you.